If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Acts, the 12th chapter. This is where we will spend our time today. This, maybe even in this number of people, but there may be everybody in this room right now feels differently about this than I. And that this aspect of what it is to walk with Jesus is no issue for you. I don't know. It is one for me. And it could just be where I am right now in life. But if it's not an issue for you, that's great. But it seems to me that we as moderns walk in this world, we are so caught in the practical, so caught by laundry and a yard and a farm and a business and work and interactions at the marketplace where we have to deal with people and things that we have to take care of and taxes and all of the things that every day present themselves to us in such a way that we have to do something about them. That those experiences strip away from us the idea that we live in two worlds. We've got one foot in this world, we've got another foot in a supernatural world where things are happening that are unseen to us, but that world is more real than this one is. And it's hard. It's hard. This text we're going to look at today, I hope, will change that perspective a bit such that when we leave here today, we have more of a grasp of the fact that we do live in a supernatural world. It's not a world that's just governed by sight and sound and smell and taste and touch. It's a world that's governed by forces that are beyond that. And those forces are powerful and that they are moving and things are happening. I look at it this way. Do we really grasp who we are as followers of Jesus? When I look at life and I see the suffering that comes and goes and the good things, and I see aging, what I see people being pressed closer and closer and closer to the point at which the only thing that matters is who I am before God in Jesus. That's how it looks to me. I don't know what that means, but I hope that as this goes forward today that we'll come to a place where it'll mean more to us. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 12. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some of those who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword, and when he saw that this pleased the Jewish officials, he proceeded to seize Peter also. And this happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting Peter, he put him into prison, handing Peter over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring Peter out for public trial after the Passover. Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. That night, before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and there were 2 sentries that stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. The angel struck Peter on the side and woke him up and said, "Quick, get up," and said the chains, after he said this, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to Peter, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did it. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed the angel out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing or that it was happening and that it was real. He thought, "I'm seeing a vision." They passed the first and the second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. The gate opened for them all by itself, and they walked through it. And when they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left Peter. Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating to do to me." Herod Agrippa, this is who this Herod is. There are many Herods mentioned in the New Testament, and it's a confusing thing, honestly. Herod the Great was the Herod that was there on the throne when Jesus was born. Herod the Great is the grandfather of this Herod Agrippa the First. And this Herod is the father of the Herod Agrippa the Second, who will stand before Paul when he is decided to go to Rome, and he's carried from pillar to post and the various governors. He stands before Herod. That will be Herod Agrippa II, this Herod Agrippa I's son. Why is the Herod line so confusing? Well, Herod the Great had 10 wives. He was a busy guy. And these 10 wives, there were many of the children that he murdered. The wives and husbands of the Herod line intermarried. There were people marrying their relatives. And a lot of scholarship looks at the line of the Herods and says, why were they like they were? The subsequent ones, especially Herod Archelaus, the two Agrippas, why were they crazy? They wonder if it's not because of all of the incestuous relationships that they had, where you've got brothers and sisters having children. So Herod's father was a man named Aristobulus. He'd been murdered by Aristobulus' father was Herod the Great. And Herod the Great murdered his son. After his death, Herod Agrippa I, this Herod, was sent to Rome to be educated. And once he got there, he grew very close to the imperial family as he grew up. He was, because of the imperial family, because of the wealth, and who his father was, his grandfather especially, he was a playboy. And by AD 23, it was read of him, according to the historians, that he had fallen so much into debt in Rome because his bar tab just got too high, that he ran to Palestine to hide out. This, of course, is back before there were cell phones and GPS and the FBI. So you could just move to another province in the Roman Empire. Nobody could find you, really. So he lived with his uncle, Herod Antipas. Antipas is the Herod that was alive when Jesus had his ministry. Another Herod. He was the one who oversaw Jesus' trial and the crucifixion and resurrection. That's Herod Antipas. That's Herod Agrippa I's uncle. This is like, I got to tell you this just as a side note here. You guys will sit there on a conversation like on a Wednesday night or a Sunday, and you'll start talking about, well, this person is my cousin by this family, and this connection, and this person over here by the and it would go way off down the line, and I got to be honest with you, I just glaze over. I can't follow any of that. I'm sorry. Because for me, I have my grandfather and grandparents, and then after them, I don't know any of those people. I just don't know them. So I can understand why reading about the Herods, it gets to where we just kind of glaze over after a while. But it's very interesting in that Herod Agrippa I, friend of the imperial family, he returned to Rome once Tiberius was governor, the emperor. And once Tiberius was emperor, he arrested Herod Agrippa I because Herod Agrippa said something ugly about the emperor. So he's in jail now. Tiberius dies and Caligula becomes the emperor. Well, Caligula and Herod Agrippa I grew up together in the Roman palace as children. And so Caligula lets him out and makes him a governor over a couple of places in Palestine. And then after Caligula leaves the throne, Claudius becomes emperor, and he takes Herod and makes him the king over Judea and Samaria. So that history, these interlacings are all interesting to me because they say a lot about what's going on and about what God is doing. Because right now in history, Jerusalem is no longer the center of ministry. It's now Antioch. The gospel is going out to the Gentiles. And so the persecution that Herod brings, which he brought for no motivation that was pure, the persecution that Herod brings is dispersing the gospel. It's doing God's work. People are hearing the gospel in Gentile nations where they would never have heard the gospel if it were up to the Jews. They would have stayed there in Jerusalem, and Christianity would have become just another Jewish sect. But why was Agrippa persecuting? Why did Agrippa I persecute? Why did he put Peter in prison? Well, it was for one reason alone. He wanted to please the Jews. The Herod line, they are children of Esau. They're Edomites. They're Idumeans. They're not Jews. And so when they ascended the throne, placed there by the Roman Empire, they wanted to please the Jews. We want the Jews to like us, the Herod family. So Herod says, I know what I'll do. I'll take James and I'll have his head cut off. So James, the brother of John, the apostle, is beheaded. And just like the text says, this pleased the Jews. So Herod says, now I'll go get the ringleader. I'll get Peter and throw him into prison. Herod was so zealous to please the Jews that the record, the Mishnah, says that Herod would carry his own basket into the offering, into the temple of sacrifice. He would carry his own sacrifice in so that the other Jews would see him. He wanted to make them happy. So the motivation for having James beheaded is nothing more than he's just trying to please the Jews. Now, stop for a minute and think about Peter for a minute. And think about Peter's friends. Think about John the Apostle, who's lost his brother. When Herod made a decision to bring James in and have him executed, there was nothing anybody could do. This is a time in history. We live in this country and we think about the fact that it's by the people, for the people, of the people. We have representative government. If we don't like what's going on, there are too many potholes in the street, we get on the phone, we call somebody up, or we write them a letter. We don't like the way the taxes are. We can speak into that and we have some power. These people had no power whatsoever. If Herod decided, imagine yourself living in communist China during the 40s and you have a farm. And the communists come and they just seize all your property. Put you out of your house, seize your property, mow your house down and make it part of the farm field. You're homeless. All your property's gone and you're not going to hire a lawyer in communist China to get your property back. Who are you going to complain to? It isn't like on TV, you don't call Gary and get some kind of representation, or Farah and Farah. You're done. These people lived in that same kind of predicament. When the king decided something, it's decided. And there's no place to turn beyond the king. So the full weight of that is brought down on Peter. It's already been brought down on James, and they couldn't do anything about that. Now it's been brought down on Peter. And think about being in that group in Jerusalem where John is, and the sympathy that you would have felt for John. If it would be as though one of us had been dragged off by the authorities and put to death, and that a brother or sister were left in this congregation. Think of the sympathy that would surround that person and the reality that that could be any of us. That's what Peter's facing. There's no sense here about Peter. He's been delivered a couple of times. He's been put into prison. But this is different. This is very different. It's kind of like this. Herod makes this decision about James's life in the same way that if you are... I'll tell you a story. When I was traveling with the first band I traveled with, we were in Miami Beach, Florida, and we were playing at the state fair. We had a tent set up. The sponsors, a bunch of churches had got together. They'd bought a tent, big tent, hold 2,000 people easily. And they had set it up, and the tent was there, and they brought us in and two other bands, and we, for 12 hours a day, we played music and brought people in, and we talked to them about the gospel. There were a bunch of volunteers who would talk to people about the gospel. So we were there. And every night, we would get done at 11:30 at night. When they shut the fair down, they made us play right up till the fair was done. Now you can go home. We would pack up a lot of the equipment and store it in the bus where we could lock it. Well, after 4 nights, nobody's bothering any of this stuff because some of the stuff was too big to pack away. I'd been packing away all my equipment every night, all the stuff that I used to play. One night, the 4th night, I decided, it's 11:30, I'm tired. I don't feel like doing this. I come back the next morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, we had to be ready to play, and I got there, and I looked down and I thought, something looks different. My guitar amplifier was gone. Now, here I am in Miami, Florida. I don't have any money. I don't have any way to replace it. Somebody loaned me a guitar amplifier, and we got through the rest of the week playing through somebody else's equipment. That was fine. But you know and I know that when people steal things like that, they're not stealing it because they want it. They're stealing it to take it to a pawn shop, and the pawn operator is going to give them $10 for something that was for you or me very precious. Very precious. I would have paid them $10 not to take it. This is what Herod's doing. He is persecuting the Christians not because he cares about any of this. He's doing it in the cheapest way he could do it, and that is just to make the Jews happy. That's all he's doing it for. He is toying with people's lives in order to please the Jews. Now, Peter is treated as though he is an insurrectionist to the throne. He's got 16 soldiers in 3-hour rotations, 4 at the time, guarding him 24 hours a day. Every 3 hours, they take the 2 that are chained, 1 on each side of Peter. They take the 2 at the gate, and they rotate them. So Peter is being guarded like he's pretty seriously a criminal. Why is that? Well, I'm going to say it's because Herod has some history with Peter now. And he knows that Peter has been let out of this prison a couple of times. So he's going to say to Peter, you might have gotten out before, but you're not getting out this time. We're going to make sure that when this Passover week's over and we come to the last day of the week and we wake up on Sunday morning, your head's coming off. You're going to be right there in that prison where I thought you were. You're not getting out. Now, isn't it interesting? So many tie-ins here with Judaism. For instance, James is beheaded. All right, there are now 11 apostles. You don't read any place in the text where they've scurried around to find a replacement. That shows you that the gospel is now becoming more of a Gentile situation. The reason there were 12 apostles is because there are 12 tribes of Israel. And when Judas killed himself, they went right out, drew lots, and they replaced Judas so that they would have the 12 once again. They don't do that this time. Now in Jerusalem, and it's significant, and we'll get to that in a moment, that all of this happens during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover week. Very significant. People were praying in Jerusalem for Peter. And the word there is ektenos. Ektenos. That's not a prayer like, Lord, bless Peter. Help Peter. Make him comfortable in the prison. Be with his family. It's not like that. The word ektenos means straining against a weight. They were straining in prayer. And they went the whole week, so far as we know, praying for Peter. And think about what this looks like to the world, to people who don't believe. If one of us were put in prison for the fact that we're believers, what would we do? Let's find a lawyer that's sympathetic to this to see what we can do about this. Let's talk to our state representatives. Let's do something. We've got to do something. We might pray, but we've got to do something. These people couldn't do anything. They couldn't go to Herod and plead for Peter. Herod has made a decision. He's already killed James. So this thing is going to happen. The only thing they could do was pray for him. Think how wimpy that looks from people who don't believe. I remember I was listening to a debate between Christopher Hitchens and a man named Mark D. Roberts, who wrote a really good book about the truthfulness of the Gospels and the history, a scholar of the New Testament. Christopher Hitchens did one thing every debate. I've probably listened to a dozen or more. Every debate that he ever engaged in, he did one thing. He started out his first talk this way. He said, I want you in this audience or you on the stage to tell me one moral action or preachment that you can do that an atheist cannot. And so, again, Mark D. Roberts, they're having this debate. And then at the end of it, he says, did you forget my question? Have you thought of something? And Mark D. Roberts says, yes, I have. He says, I pray for my children every night when I put them to bed. I don't think an atheist could, in clear conscience and with a consistency of mind, pray for his children. Christopher Hitchens' response was, well, that's not an action. That's not an action. That's the response of these people would get from people who didn't believe. They are praying for Peter. So what? Go ahead. Pray all you want. Herod's got him. He's chained. He's not going anywhere. And this is a different kind of imprisonment that Peter is suffering. The other times he was with his buddies. Remember, they would sing hymns and stuff, and jailer would come back. There's a group of people in there. Not this time. Peter's in there by himself. They've killed James. He's got a lot of time on his hands to just think about what's coming. And he's chained in that prison with these Roman guards who aren't at all sympathetic to him. So, how is it that Peter then, since I first became a Christian, this has always struck me, this text. How is it with all of that, Peter is asleep in the prison? He's asleep. I have a friend here in this area. You all would know this friend of mine very, very well, so I'm not going to mention the name, who I used to meet with this person a lot, and I remember talking to them about the fact that for years, only until this year, have I started to sleep what I would call normally, more than 6 hours a night. And I would talk about that, and this person said, I got to tell you, Rip, I lay down at night, I'm alone in my home, I'm not young, and I sleep through the night, every night. She said, I know the Lord is watching out for me, I don't worry about any of it. Peter is sleeping in this prison between these guards, chained to them. And Roman prisons didn't have cable or air conditioning. They were nasty, nasty places. As a matter of fact, when you were manacled to the wall, everything your body did was right there with you while you were chained up. You didn't go anywhere. You didn't get cleaned up. You didn't get a bath. None of that. And so to be laying there chained like this and sleeping and knowing that James has been beheaded, this is Passover Eve, the night before this Saturday night. And the next day is Sunday, the first day of the week, which for the Jews was not an important day. And that's the day that Peter's going to be let out. Isn't that fascinating? So Peter's sound asleep, and the angel has to kick him to wake him up. I mean, I can't fathom that a person could sleep like that in these conditions. And you might think to yourself, well, I wonder why. Well, maybe it's because Jesus had told Peter, you remember back in John, right at the end, Peter, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. And there's a day coming, Peter, when you'll be very old and somebody will lead you where you don't want to go and you won't tend to yourself. So maybe Peter's remembering that. He's saying, Jesus said I would be old, so I'm not worried about what they're going to do to me. They're not going to be able to kill me because of Jesus' prophecy. That's possible. Maybe it's that Peter knows people are praying for him in Jerusalem. That's possible. But I'm going to say this is supernatural. That Peter is sleeping like this because God gives us what we need when we need it. If you and I find ourselves in a situation where all hope is lost, I'm going to believe that God's going to give the grace that's necessary in that moment. We might not experience it right now, but when we really need it, it will be there. And it was there for Peter. He wakes up, he doesn't know where he is, he doesn't recognize that this is happening around him, the chains fall off, Peter's in a stupor. The angel has to tell him all the practical things to do. Get up, put on your clothes, put on your sandals. Isn't that something? This is why you look at the Gospels and you look at Acts and you say, this is history. This is not a fable. Because you see this incredibly supernatural event laced in with the most mundane things you could possibly think of. Jesus raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. Go read the account for yourself. And once she's raised from the dead, just think what that would be. And then Jesus says, why don't we go get her something to eat? She's hungry. Let's get her some food. I mean, these interlacings are just amazing to me. It tells me that this is a history. It's not a fable. Now, I want to focus on for just a moment, if we could. First of all, it's not an accident in my mind that Peter is delivered on Passover. Jesus was crucified on Passover Eve. Jesus came back from the tomb the day after Passover, on the Sunday. Peter is going to be beheaded on Sunday. He's delivered on Passover Eve before he's to be beheaded. That's not an accident. God is sending a message and saying, you know what? These historical things mean something. They're symbols about what we are today, and they're going to mean something in the future. I'll guarantee you that the Jewish believers at that point in history, that was very significant for them that Peter came back to them on the first day of the week after Passover. Very significant. And it's not an accident that he's put into prison by Herod during Passover week when he couldn't be executed, because that was Jewish law. Very significant. But I want us to think about this from the standpoint of who we are. I started off by saying that for me, the supernatural aspects of who we are, somehow they get buried in the natural day-to-day affairs of living in this world. And it's hard to hang on to the fact that just like we did today, we prayed for Clint, we prayed for Nancy, we prayed for your family, we prayed for the person whose name Gregory Morgan, we prayed, who lost his brother, that God would comfort him. We're praying for these things. Do we do it out of a sense of just this is what we do in the church service? Or do we do it because we really believe that God is working? I can't speak for anybody in this room except for myself. Part of me prays because I want to be obedient to God. But there's a part of me that says, I want to be like they were. I want to be like a little kid who looks at God and says, I know that God is for me. And that when I ask him for things, he is listening to me. There's going to come a time, maybe you all, some of you in this room probably have already had that moment in your life when something was just wildly out of your control. If you come with me sometime to ICU, and you've been there, and you see somebody in the bed, and they got a mask on, and the oxygen's turned wide open, and they're breathing, heaving for every breath, and their blood pressure and those monitors up there are clicking away, and there's not one thing that you can do standing next to that bed to make those monitor numbers look different. That's out of control. And we're all going to face stuff like that. We already have. Does anything from this world's perspective look more useless than you or me standing next to that bed or in our home praying for that person or praying for somebody in our family? It looks useless. But you see, we live in two worlds. We live in one world that says it's useless. We live in another world where we are the children of the maker of the universe. And when God sees, when people see God move like that, they take notice. They took notice then, and they'll take notice today. I don't know where everybody is, but if I've said